Today marks exactly 11 months since I went over to Istanbul, Turkey and decided to get my hair transplant. So as a milestone and to celebrate that, I would like to share 10 things with you that you may want to consider, or things that you would potentially want to know if you're looking to go and get yours done. But first, let me show you how mine is looking. Hopefully that focuses. So compared to how my hair looked before I went and got it done, and I will show you some before and afters, that's not what the video is about, but I think the result has turned out very, very good. Now, let's get straight into it. 10 things that I wish I'd known before I went and got the procedure done. Now, this is completely off the cuff, so I haven't practiced it, I haven't taken any notes, so if there are some mistakes, wish I allow for that, but I am trying to keep this as raw and uncut as possible. I don't really want to be doing tons of editing just because it then comes across as a little bit more natural. A lot of the videos that you see, very heavily edited, lots of different, and I will post some examples so you guys see what the hair looked like before, but I don't want it to be a very heavily edited video. So, number one, okay, so the sleep. So that is one of the main things that you are going to want to know about. So I remember that when we went and got it done on the day, we got picked up a little bit late actually. We got driven in. By the time we got all the consultations and all that done, we actually started at about 11 o'clock. The whole extraction procedure started at about 11 o'clock. And then we got a minor break about 4 or 5 hours in, and that was post extraction. So after they'd extracted all the grafts, we got about a 5-minute break, straight back into it. So as a result of that, by the end, when we finished at gone 10 o'clock, I was shattered. Like, I remember the taxi came, picked us up, and I went over with my friend. So we got dropped off at the hotel, and because it was so late, we actually decided to walk across the road and went over to a Turkish restaurant type place, had some food. I can't even remember. I mean, I probably got some pictures of it. And at that point, we were both out, right? So we went over to our rooms, and same as him, I was out, right? I slept through the entire night, and you know, I remember waking up first thing in the morning. I felt refreshed, and yeah, so the sleep wasn't all that bad that first night. So I thought, oh, okay, there's no pain. So I don't know what the big deal was about, because you see people talk about it on TikTok and YouTube videos and that. People are talking about how terrible the sleep is and how difficult it is to sleep. But that would have been because that first day I would have been drugged up to, you know, because obviously they put all the anesthetics and stuff like that, which I'm going to get into as my second point. And at that point, you know, you're tired, so you're going to sleep through the whole night. But as you start to settle into a little bit more, as the itching starts to settle, which I will talk about again another point, you end up not having a very good time sleeping. Because again, what you have to do is you have to get one of those neck pillows, so you tuck that over and you have to sleep kind of like upright, almost like that. Because the follicles, especially for the first couple of days, you know, maybe 3 to 4 days, they are very fragile. So you have to be so careful with them. You can't get them wet, you just have to be super, super careful. So you can't, you know, touch your head, you know, the follicles can't come in contact with anything. So, after that first night, it does become pretty annoying. But after about a week, when all the follicles are settled in, the itching stops, it does become fairly easy to now sleep. And then once you're past the 10th day mark, sleep is actually just back to normal. You know, after 12 days, I think it was, the scabs come off, and at that point, it's just back to normal. So to rate that as an inconvenience, or how much would that factor in if I was to go and get my hair transplant done again, or if I was thinking about getting it done, honestly, it probably wouldn't factor in for all that much, because it is an inconvenience, but really it's minor. Point number 2, the itching. Okay, so the itching is something that you don't really think about. So the first night when you go and get it done, you're not going to feel any itching. It doesn't really feel like anything really. It kind of just feels numb. And then maybe 2 to 3 days, once the follicle starts to heal and things like that, it really does itch a lot, and the itching does become pretty unbearable, and you can't really touch your head because, like I said, it's one of these things where you don't want to damage the follicle. So after about 4 or 5 days, when you start to when it starts to settle in a little bit, I kind of just would tap my head a little bit like that, and that would help. But as I said, the itching is one of those things that you really need to be prepared for, because that's probably one of the more uncomfortable parts of the entire process. And then to help that even further, when you're maybe 5-6 days in, at that point you can actually start to wet the hair, I suppose. So what you can do is you can go over to the sink and you can grab a little bit of water and then tap, like kind of like gently. You don't want to damage the follicles, even though at that point the follicles are actually settled in so far in that you're going to need a surgical instrument to remove them. However, you're still a little bit scared, and obviously they tell you at the clinic that you have to be as careful as possible, so you kind of refrain from touching them all that much. Point number 3. When you go out there, they will tell you, right, so what we're going to do is we're going to do local anesthetic, which would include injections of lidocaine or various different various different local anesthetics, which are going to numb your whole head. And a lot of the time, people will complain about that being the most painful part of the entire transplant. So when we went out there, the doctor said to us, look, I would recommend you get the extended anesthetic, I guess, which is an IV. So essentially what would happen is you're going to get sedated. So before the procedure starts, you get the anesthesiast come over to you, put an IV drip into you, and then you almost like doze off. You almost like, it's a very weird, it's like a twilight sleep. It's almost like you're not asleep, you're aware of what's going on, but you're kind of not there, if that makes sense. So that I found helped a lot. I felt no pain from the initial injections. And then the entire time after that, when you start to feel any pain, you just lift your arm up, they top it up, and it's pretty much as much as it gets. You don't feel any pain or anything like that. So considering we sat through an 11-hour procedure, the pain was basically non-existent. So that would be something I would highly, highly recommend, because there was a guy that was traveling with us. He was from the US, I believe, and he didn't want to pay the extra for the anesthetic. And he said, oh my God, like that was so painful. What did you think? And we were like, well, we didn't feel it. So he regretted doing that after obviously not having the extra anesthetic done. So it's definitely well worth doing. Point number 4 is pain. I know I've briefly touched on it, but I still want to touch on it somewhat. Pain post-transplant and things like that. So what you will notice is that once you are finished, you don't really feel any pain. And you think, okay, well, it's probably because of the anesthetic, and once that wears off, I'm going to start feeling pain. No, they will send you home with some mild painkillers, paracetamol it was in our case, and they said, look, if you're getting any pain, take one and then that will be it. But I didn't feel any pain, my friend didn't feel any pain either, because the way it works is because they're taking each and single one individually, the hairs are being extracted one at a time, you're not going to feel pain, really, even after that. So with the pain, as I said, pain on a scale of 1 to 10, I would say I would rank it 2 out of 10 for the entire procedure. Whilst it's being done, towards the end, it might start to get, 6, 7, 8. It does start to get sore, but equally, for how it looks and how bloody it looks, I will post a picture here. It really isn't all that bad. After that, like I said, the first, second day, and then after that, there is no pain. There isn't really anything painful per se. Okay, so pain is again really a non-factor. So it looks scary, but it's not. Point number 5 is going to be the damaging the follicle. So a lot of people think I don't want to touch my head, I don't want to do anything because I'm going to damage the hair follicles. And for the first 2, 3, 4 days, that is really the case. You have to be super careful. However, past maybe the 4th day, the follicles are so settled in at that point that really you do need a surgical instrument to get those removed. So it's not really going to be something that you have to worry about massively. Like if you happen to touch your head or anything like that, don't freak out. You haven't ruined it. Those hair follicles are settled in so much. And again, they will put a lot more in. You are going to lose some, but the majority of them are going to be fine. The next thing that you're going to want to think about is the shedding. So what will happen is when you get the hair transplant, you're going to get these little dots like on your head. And almost you think that looks really good. As in your hair almost looks like you've got hair, which is weird as well because with my friend, they actually shaved his head completely. Whereas with mine, I had about 4 weeks worth of hair growth, which was interesting because I will show you pictures. Because what happened was they shaved the sides completely, but they left the top. So I actually had about 4 weeks of hair growth. And granted, my hair was thin, but it wasn't like it was just hair, right? It was still enough of it. So then when I got it done, it almost looked like I had like a Mohican type haircut. So my hair actually looked better almost. I was like, oh, that looks really good. And then when you end up taking the scabs off on day 11, you end up feeling quite, not disappointed because you know what to expect, or you should know what to expect, but you're almost like, you're a little bit disheartened because you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't taken the scabs off now, because this is the only thing you're going to be thinking about in the time that you have the scabs. You're like, when I take them off. And then what's going to happen is that the hair follicles that have been planted will fall out, which is going to lead us into point number 7. The hair follicles that you have planted in are going to start falling out. And when they start falling out, you're going to look worse, arguably, than you did beforehand. Because let's say if you had a shaved head or whatever, you're going to end up looking worse. And that process actually doesn't get much better until month 8. I actually reviewed someone else's video on TikTok the other day, and he was in month 5. And he was like, I actually regret getting my hair transplant. And my response to that was, don't be disappointed yet, don't be disheartened, because up to month 8 maybe, the hair just keeps growing, falling out, growing, falling out, growing, falling out, and then almost out of nowhere, by about month 8, boom, it just starts to grow like crazy. And you end up seeing it then. But I was actually looking at my hair about month 4, 5, 6, and I was thinking, that hasn't worked. And I was actually tempted to book in another transplant, and I messaged the clinic and I said, like, can I book in for a second one? And like, you have to be a year in at least for us to be able to assess what's gone on. Has it worked? Has it not worked? And then potentially go and get a second transplant. Okay, point number 8 is going to be the hairline. So a lot of people online were making fun of my hairline, and because my hairline has a widow's peak, so it almost like curves down, right? So a lot of people were like, why did you get a receding hairline? And the thing with that is, you got to consider that the hair follicles that you've got on the sides and the back of the head, which is your donor area, right? When they extract the hair follicles from a donor area, generally that will be the back and the sides of the head, these hair follicles are gone. Once they're gone, they are gone. You cannot get those back. So you got to consider that if you end up taking hair follicles that potentially might be able to go on top of your head, but you only use them on the front, if, let's say, in time, your hair ends up receding even more, what's going to end up happening is you're going to have a very strong hairline and you're going to be bald on top, which is something that you don't really want. That's not going to look very good, is it? So with the thing that you got to consider is, when you go out there, they will tell you how many follicles you have, which is going to lead us into point number 9. They are going to tell you, you have X amount of follicles available to you, because it's going to vary from person to person. Some people are going to have a lot of them, where they can probably have 2, 3, 4 hair transplants, and some people don't even have enough for one. Okay, so it's going to vary person to person. So they will generally try and fill out certain gaps, maybe around the crown and things like that first. And then if you then have enough, then you can go back for a second one and get those put into your hairline. Why wouldn't you get that done on the first go? Is because the amount of you put in isn't an infinite amount. So what that means is, if you put in, let's say, 4,000 follicles, that will be fine. But if you try and put 7,000 or 8,000 follicles, not only is that very time consuming, granted you could go back the second day, get more in, but in order for them follicles to settle in, they need a certain amount of blood flow. So what's going to happen is, you're going to end up losing them and wasting them. So if you are someone who's gone past a certain point and you've lost a decent amount of hair, then you might have to have more than one hair transplant. So that's going to very much depend on the person, right? So for example, with me, I don't know if you can tell, but I could do with a little bit more on the crown, and potentially, again, like I said, have a little bit more filled in on the sides, because I'm someone who's got a fairly decent amount of hair follicles, grafts available. But again, you're not going to get that done on the first go, because the body can only take in so much. It's almost like anything. It's like, let's say with a tattoo. Even if you are able to sit through a 24-hour tattoo session, your body can only take in so much. So you kind of have to do it in parts. And the last thing that I want to talk about is going to be post-hair transplant medication. So finasteride would be the one. They will offer it to you. I don't know where you're from. Depending on where you're from, that will depend, and that will make a difference. But for someone like myself, finasteride, they will offer it to you, and they will say, oh, year supply, and they will try and charge you maybe £30. That's what they were trying to charge us. When in reality, you can order it here off of a pharmacy. So I get mine off of a pharmacy. I can't actually exactly remember the name of it, but it's an online pharmacy where you go in there, you fill out all your information, and they will send you like a 3-month supply, a 1-month supply, a 6-month supply. So I tend to do a subscription of 6 months supply for £60. So that's £10 a month. So it's very, very cheap. Now, when people talk about the side effects, again, everyone's going to be different. I'm not going to tell you, go and take finasteride. What I will say is that, depending on your circumstances, I would at least try it. Okay, so for myself, I haven't experienced any side effects whatsoever, but some people might, because again, it will just vary and depend on the person. So with myself, I am on TRT. So when you consider finasteride is what's called a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. So testosterone that we produce or is being supplemented through, you supplement it yourself, testosterone will then convert into a hormone called dihydrotestosterone via an enzyme called a 5-alpha reductase. The 5-alpha reductase will convert testosterone into DHT. DHT is what's responsible for hair loss. So finasteride is a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. So how could it have side effects, you ask? Well, the thing with DHT is DHT actually has a lot more properties and is one of the most important male hormones, in fact. So crushing DHT altogether completely is going to have certain side effects, things like sex drive. The things that make a man, so deepening the voice, hair growth, all of that stuff is down to DHT. So this is something that you might want to consider and think about. As far as minoxidil, which I could talk about in another video, I've tried minoxidil, but minoxidil I could not be consistent with. So with minoxidil, I used to have to put it on my head and then wash it off. But I couldn't really be consistent with it. And with minoxidil, you go through a shedding stage. So let's say I start it on day 1. And then what's going to happen is you're going to start shedding the hair. And that hair will then start to regrow. However, if you are not consistent with it, you're going to start, stop. You're constantly going through that shedding cycle, and you're probably going to end up losing more hair than if you had never done it. So if you can't stay consistent with minoxidil, don't use it. But anyway, I think I'm going to leave it here. I think I've given you a decent amount of bits to think about, things that you can talk about in the comments. So if you've got any questions, let me know. Let me know if you want to hear more hair transplant information, more, anything related to hair transplant. I am thinking of potentially going back and getting a second one done. But yeah, any more, leave them in the comments. And with that, I'm going to leave you here.